Growing up is a relentless journey of self-discovery. For some, this path is smoother, while for others, it's a balancing act marked by confusion and challenges. For those of us who escape into the digital realm, certain icons rise to prominence. These figures become the chronically online's patron saints and guiding lights. They offer us inspiration and models to emulate as we stumble through life, trying to figure out who we are. For me, Edie Sedgwick became that icon. I found her on Tumblr, Andy Warhol superstar. Edie was the socialite everyone wanted to meet, a luminous figure whose every move in Warhol's factory seemed orchestrated to perfection. Within Warhol's factory, Edie became more than just a muse. She was the centerpiece of his creative universe, at least for a bit, with Warhol obsessively chronicling her every gesture and expression. At a bookshop downtown, a guy there helped me find a biography of Edie by Gene Stein. He talked about her kind of lovingly, the way gay men fawn over icons of the past. Then he told me she died so young, hating Warhol, drug overdose, real sad end. I hated hearing that. It wasn't that the dude didn't respect her, he called her an icon, but it bothered me that he reduced her to something so small. I still had no idea who Edie was beyond what I could see in her pictures. That's what happens to a muse lost to time. They get reduced to a couple of words, pieces of a bigger story centered on the artist, in this case Warhol. The true story of Edie is devastating in the end, but the depth of who she truly was makes her someone worth caring about. She wasn't just a socialite turned party girl cautionary tale. She was a multifaceted girl on fire whose gorgeous face masked profound inner struggles. Edie lived a full life, one marked by brilliance and tragedy, resilience and fragility. She was more than just the poor little rich girl. All I ever knew about Edie was her time in New York and with Warhol. Yet her move to the city was a desperate bid to escape a chaotic, abusive, and oppressive upbringing. Edith Minturn Sedgwick was born in 1943 into the affluent Sedgwick family of Santa Barbara, California, an illustrious American lineage dating back to the founding of the United States. The Sedgwicks were a dynasty of rich, well-to-do people. Their name was synonymous with tradition and high society. They possessed new money sensibilities, backed by old money bank accounts. Their physical beauty was evident to all who met them. They were gods, living unblemished, perfect lives that often made those around them feel subhuman and dowdy by comparison. They moved among circles where who you knew was fantastically important. Fuzzy, the patriarch of Edie Sedgwick's home, would often categorize people as being out of the top drawer or not. Underneath that shimmering veneer of privilege and elegance lay the oppressive reality of the Sedgwick surname. The immense expectations attached to their name became a curse for many within the family. The pressure to maintain their lofty status and the rigid adherence to tradition fostered an environment where personal struggles were hidden away. Depression was a common, though unspoken, affliction that claimed the lives of numerous Sedgwicks. In this world, women were expected to follow a strict societal script, charm elite suitors, marry into prestige, excel in genteel pursuits, and conform quietly to societal norms. Edie defied those expectations from an early age. She was boisterous and unapologetic, challenging her father openly on many occasions. At one of the Sedgwick dinner parties, Edie watched as her father blatantly flirted with another woman. She walked up to him and yelled, "Oh, for God's sake, Fuzzy," making a spectacle of the man to a house full of guests. Edie loved her little rebellions. Each child internalized these battles differently. For Edie, the turmoil led to a severe bout of anorexia. Unbeknownst to Fuzzy, Alice forced her daughter to withdraw from school. One day, while moving through their home, she discovered her father with another woman. True to her nature, Edie confronted him. This time, Fuzzy reacted with violence, branding Edie as insane and unwell, and coercing everyone around them to agree with his assessment. To silence her, he resorted to administering tranquilizers, knocking his own daughter out, and forcing her into compliance. At dinner parties, he perpetuated the narrative that his little girl was sadly unwell, a story readily accepted within their social sphere. Still so, the little rebellions continued. By the time Edie turned 17, she had successfully laid claim to the Sedgwick Manor. With doll-like clothes and a breathless, childish voice, she skipped through the halls, sliding out of punishments for sneaking out or talking back. She managed to find a way to twist that oppressive atmosphere to work in her favor. Fuzzy slowly took notice of his loosening grip over his favorite daughter. She still hid a secret that was slowly taking its toll on her, one only intensified by the relentless critiques on her growing body. Edie was still struggling with anorexia. It had drastically altered her appearance by the time her father took notice, and when he did, he was enraged. He immediately pressured her mother, who had been hiding Edie's secret for years, into forcing their daughter into a hospital. In the fall of 1962, she was sent to Silver Hill, a facility that, despite its outward luxury with white tablecloth dinners, subjected patients to harsh treatments like electroshock therapy. For a girl who had only known privilege, the hospital was a truly harrowing ordeal. Patients of Silver Hill likened the experience to participating in their own execution. Edie spent 2 years there. She became hardened, but somehow was able to still turn on that megawatt smile she'd later be known for. When she finally got out, she set her sights to Cambridge, far away from home. By the fall of 1963, she was walking the halls, studying art. Those who met Edie described her as chic and adorable, a bundle of contradictions that made her uniquely beguiling. Energetic yet erratic, high-strung yet charismatic, she embodied everything all at once. Edie's mercurial nature meant she could be immensely difficult one moment and incredibly amenable the next, oscillating between creative streaks and chaotic nights. This unpredictability was part of Edie's charm. She was instantly adored by anyone she met. Edie often relied on her friends to navigate the world. Beneath that unrelenting charm was a fragility that only those closest to her knew. An awful night or a particularly stressful morning could shatter her to a million pieces. Eventually, Cambridge became too confining for Edie. She had a close-knit community there, but she yearned for the excitement and possibilities New York had waiting for her. By then, she was a well-known socialite, a princess of the Cambridge scene. Everyone knew Edie. On her 21st birthday, April 20th, 1964, she received an $80,000 trust fund from her grandmother. With this windfall, she escaped to New York to pursue a career in modeling. But more than anything, she wanted freedom. Free from her family's expectations, New York became Edie's playground. In the city, she continued the revelry, serving drinks and raucously leading conversations. Edie navigated New York's dynamic landscape with the same mercurial charm she had always possessed, but more commanding, more free, and much more willing to see what the night would bring. Unfortunately, the Sedgwick curse was closing in. Soon after she moved to the city, home called her back. Within 18 months, both of Edie's beloved brothers, Minty and Bobby, died by suicide, leaving her grappling with a profound sense of grief and intensified her feelings of isolation. Minty was the first to pass on, while receiving treatment at Silver Hill for a mental breakdown, a forced attempt to cure his homosexuality. His doctor told him he would never get out of the hospital. Facing relentless harassment from his father, Minty finally broke down and tried to confide in him about his true self. Instead of offering support, Fuzzy lashed out. "What's wrong with you? Stop being crazy. I can't stand it. You're a Sedgwick." This brutal rejection came just days before Minty took his own life. Edie was devastated. Her brother Jonathan recalled seeing her soon after. She started beating me, hammering me with her fists in the chest, saying, "Come on, cry, goddamn you." She was just pouring tears. A close friend, Jonathan Walker, revealed that Minty had called Edie just before his death, saying, "You are the only Sedgwick I can ever hope for." A loving goodbye whose weight became clear only in hindsight. Despite hospital and police records confirming it as suicide, their mother Alice refused to accept the truth. After all, he was a Sedgwick, and Sedgwick men do not die in this way. When Bobby died soon after in a reckless motorcycle accident, an incident many believed was intentional, Edie responded with haunting resignation. "I knew he was going to die." She couldn't do anything about it. She came to terms with it. To her, it was inevitable. The tragedy of a life cut short was a story she knew all too well. Edie responded to her pain by immersing herself deeper into the frenetic energy of New York City, attempting to stifle her grief with the noise and excitement of endless nights out. Remarkably, despite the tragedies she had endured, Edie was still able to light up every room she entered. She remained the center of attention everywhere she went, effortlessly engaging with everyone she met, from high society elites to the guy at the corner deli. Her ability to bounce back from profound personal losses seemed second nature, a result of growing up learning to compartmentalize her pain. Friends often described her wiping away tears as she rose from couches to dance and lose herself once more into the crowds. Edie Sedgwick met Andy Warhol at one of those parties in early 1965. She was performing her unique dance, a ballet like rock and roll. Andy was searching for a new star. His previous muse was losing steam. A friend insisted he meet this girl named Edie Sedgwick. Upon seeing her, Andy whispered, "Oh, she's so beautiful." That's how it started. He was smitten. She was quickly invited to see Warhol in his element. Stepping inside, she was immediately brought into the factory fold. Andy Warhol guided her to sit on a chest. She complied. Then Warhol quietly nodded for her to remain seated beside the unfolding scene. The artist found his ultimate muse. I've always been surprised by Andy Warhol's massive popularity. Sometimes I feel mildly annoyed when people say they love him and considered him their favorite artist because, to me, his work felt sterile, so commercial that it seems to have lost its meaning. The real test lies in asking why someone likes Warhol. At first glance, his art can appear superficial, but there's more beneath the surface. Warhol has always been more of a process artist. His creative journey and the environment in which he worked in were integral to his art and his process. What makes Warhol unique and singular in the art scene isn't just his finished pieces, but who he was, how he operated, and the factory itself. Understanding Warhol's impact requires recognizing how viscerally he pushed the envelope in everything he did. Take that first film Edie did with Warhol, Vinyl. The film showcases a BDSM fantasy replete with razor blades, candles, and leather, all of which are not mere props but active elements within the story. I'll let your imagination fill in the rest. Warhol, ever the observer, sat behind his camera, directing the chaos with a detached precision. Edie sat on the trunk, bored, smoking her cigarette, occasionally flicking ash onto the boy being tortured next to her. When the film was over, people just started going at it with each other. One couple went off into the hallway, another up to the roof, another went onto the couch, and another in the bedroom. Couples, threesomes, just people standing on the side. And in the middle of all of that, Edie was just staring and talking to Warhol, who was eating a hamburger. His legs crossed, napkin to his side, completely unfazed. That was the factory. That was Warhol. Warhol sought to capture nothing, not emptiness, but the unexpected nuances of everyday existence. His films and artwork serve as historical documents, distilling the essence of ordinary moments that often pass unnoticed. Other times, they reveled into raw explorations of sexuality and unrestrained perversions. He encapsulated both the monotony of city life and the wild abandon with which people sought to escape. This focus on the seemingly insignificant or boldly taboo is where Warhol's genius resides. He elevated the mundane and the profane to the realm of art. Warhol had a unique ability to draw out people's true selves, encouraging them to reveal their authentic identities on his artistic stage. The factory wasn't just a physical space, but a conceptual platform where art and life intersected. His work challenged viewers to engage deeply, making his films a litmus test for one's willingness to appreciate art. Edie, on the other hand, had the unique quality of making everyday life seem exciting, a perfect muse for a man who immortalized the unremarkable little bits of modern life. Edie was incredible on camera. Just the way she moved, she inspired us all, Warhol remarked. Everywhere she went, things came alive. Reflecting on his first impressions of Edie, Warhol said, "I could see that she had more problems than anybody I'd ever met. So beautiful, but so sick. I was really intrigued. It was her fragility, as much as her beauty, that captivated him. A twisted mix of fascination and pity." Edie would go on to become the factory's next superstar, bringing Andy out of his shell. Where he had been a hermit, she was this glamorous socialite. She introduced him to new circles, legitimizing him in ways he hadn't experienced. He was more than flattered by her attention. He was infatuated with her, the way gay boys fawn over gorgeous, powerful women. At the height of their sexless love affair, Edie starred in film after film for Warhol. She embodied the poor little rich girl with a charisma that was both enchanting and humbling. That someone could be so dazzling yet so authentically human made Edie all the more captivating on camera. She helped solidify his status as a cultural juggernaut. The Factory, a loft entirely clad in aluminum foil, was Warhol's infamous art studio and a pulsating hub of over-the-top creativity. Open to anyone, it teemed with a constant flow of artists, musicians, and eccentrics. Drugs, particularly speed, were ubiquitous, though Andy himself never indulged. The atmosphere was both chaotic and palatial, a kingdom under Warhol's peculiar rule. People vied for his attention, and with Edie's arrival, they began to vie for hers as well. Andy was always right there with her. They both loved every second of it. He later confessed, "One person in the 60s fascinated me more than anybody I had ever known, and the fascination I experienced was probably very close to a certain kind of love." Despite his reputation as a cold, almost mechanistic man, his interactions with Edie revealed a different side. The deadpan mask he wore had slipped, exposing a warm, eager, and heartbreakingly boyish human underneath. Edie entered the scene as a Cambridge legend, rich, glamorous, beautiful, and irresistibly charismatic. She'd hang out with Andy while people came in and out of the factory, hoping to find inspiration, or rather, to help Andy find his. By night, Edie, Andy, and anyone who was still hanging around plunged into New York's wild chaos, dancing to the newest music and losing themselves in their demented, drug-soaked ruminations. Andy, ever the aloof and detached observer, acted as the ultimate instigator, like a director orchestrating the scene, and Edie was the dazzling centerpiece, indulged by everyone around her. When asked how it felt to be a superstar, Edie responded, "It's frightening and glamorous and exciting at the same time. I wouldn't change it for anything. After the bad and sad times in my life, it's something I want to do."
Well, how does your family feel about your being in these movies?
They hate it. They're terrified. They think I'm just beyond belief, out the window with me, you know. and they've decided I shouldn't have any money. They hated the idea of my doing any modeling to make my own way, and as soon as I got into this, they're sending telegrams saying, "Oh, you've got to go model, please, just for a short time anyway."
Well,
they're so horrified that it amounts to the fact that they'll endorse the modeling idea 100 times before they dream of having to deal with this.
Edie, though, still moved through life with a delicate fragility. She later admitted, "I'd make a mask out of my face because I didn't realize I was quite beautiful," she later confessed. "I'd freak out in a very physical way, and, it was all taken as a fashion trend." Behind her rising fame, the pressures of the fast-paced scene and constant attention began to take a toll on Edie. She struggled to keep up with the relentless pace. Soon she found ways to cope. Edie Sedgwick's fall into addiction began under the guise of wellness and vitality. She was introduced to Dr. Charles Roberts, who promised vitamin injections that would energize her, improve her health, and provide a daily push. Unbeknownst to Edie and countless others, Roberts was administering shots laced with methadone, pure speed. What started as weekly visits soon escalated. Once a week became twice, then daily, then multiple times a day. For Edie, they offered a temporary balm for her lingering pain. "I must say I liked the introduction to drugs I received. I was a good target for the scene. I blossomed into a healthy young drug addict," she confessed. The pervasive drug culture enveloped her, especially when the factory was bursting at the seams with it, turning coping mechanisms into destructive habits. Years of personal trauma and the relentless pressures of the scene intensified her dependency, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish between liberation and self-destruction. Through her growing dependency, the relentless pursuit of recognition and the pressures of the scene deepened her descent. That initial thrill of adoration gave way to a profound emptiness. She became the Warhol muse, a living embodiment of someone else's art. She was no longer just Edie. Edie Sedgwick's creative partnership with Andy Warhol reached its peak during a trip to Paris in April of 1965. With Edie by his side, Andy found the courage to leave behind the medium he had become synonymous with and explore new artistic realms, primarily film. They became, for lack of a better term, the it couple, appearing on the pages of Vogue, the newsstands of tabloids, and the subjects of late-night TV fodder. She thought it was funny that people thought they were important. Unfortunately, that euphoria was short-lived. By summer, Edie began to lose faith in their partnership, lamenting, "These movies are making a complete fool out of me." Those feelings were only exacerbated by a newfound love interest, Bob Dylan. Many said Andy was heartbroken. Their paramour was coming to an end. Bob Dylan was, in many ways, the antithesis of Andy Warhol. While Warhol's factory was a hub of avant-garde art and flamboyant personalities, Dylan's circle looked down on Andy and the factory scene. Dylan framed himself as a knight in shining armor for Edie, promising to whisk her away from it all. There was even talk of his manager, Albert Grossman, taking over Edie's career, and Dylan starring opposite her in a film, a project that never ultimately materialized. Speculation has long swirled that Dylan wrote the song "Just Like a Woman" about Edie. The song talks about a girl who takes just like a woman, makes love just like a woman, aches just like a woman, but breaks like a little girl. It's a fuckboy anthem, a dismissal of a woman's problems as trivial, just little girl issues with no real depth. And all girls are the same, right? In later interviews, Dylan has been vague about his relationship with Edie Sedgwick, suggesting he may have met her once or twice but doesn't recall it clearly. Let me make something abundantly clear. Bob Dylan was a fuckboy of massive proportions. Those in the factory believed Dylan was leading Edie on. When he married Sarah Lowndes in November 1965, the news was kept quiet. Andy Warhol was one of the first to find out. And when he did, he approached Edie asking, "Did you know that Bob Dylan has gotten married?" Andy knew what he was doing. Edie went pale, trembling as she responded, "What? I don't believe it." It became evident that she thought she was entering into a relationship with Dylan and that he hadn't been as truthful with her as she believed. What may have been more hurtful to her was he didn't take her seriously. She realized that Dylan never intended to make a movie with her or help her find success in Hollywood. He treated her as a passive vessel. She treated him like he was her future. By December of 1965, Edie and Andy's brilliant collaboration was coming to an end. She stopped appearing in his films and distanced herself from the factory. By this time, Edie had increasingly numbed herself with drugs. Mary Warnoff, an actress and fellow factory regular, observed Edie was always the center of attention, but there was a fragility about her. You could see the cracks starting to form. She became more erratic and unpredictable. Paul Morrissey, a filmmaker who worked closely with Warhol, recalled, "She started missing shoots, showing up late or not at all. It was clear she was struggling, but no one knew how to help." Edie was set to star in Warhol's latest venture, Lupe, originally intended to portray the story of actress Lupe Velez, who died by suicide in 1944. Andy gave Robert Hyde a single directive: "I want something where Edie commits suicide at the end." That request, delivered in Andy's characteristic monotone, was wild. For a passive engager of Warhol's film work, possibly unsurprising. Looked at with more thought, I think it says a lot more about a shift in his view of Edie. What had once been a bond held together by a kind of love was now unraveled by apathy. By the time they started filming, the script went out the window. According to Billy Name, a close associate of Warhol's, when the camera was rolling, whatever was written disappeared. The film became another unflinchingly intimate glimpse into Edie's life. Andy was almost heartless in his approach to filmmaking. The subject would be documented. The good, the bad, and the ugly. One can argue that's what makes these scenes so moving, but I think there's something fucked about watching someone waste away. By then, bruises marked her legs. Her hair was fried, and her movements were twitchy and slow. The kind of movements one makes when they're trying to pretend they're not completely fucked up. By the end of both reels, Edie's head was in a toilet. As the camera rolled on, it became clear that Edie was struggling to get a grip. This period marked a significant turning point in Edie's life. Her life was imploding, and she seemed too far gone to even notice. That night after filming, Andy invited Hyde to meet at Kettle of Fish. When Hyde arrived, he found Edie Sedgwick bawling. I asked her what was wrong, Hyde recalled. "I try to get close to him, but I can't," she whispered, referring to Andy. Moments later, Andy arrived, mute and reclusive, dressed in a crisp blue suede suit. Then Bob Dylan walked in. Edie immediately turned her bright eyes onto him and wiped away her tears. She turned on her well-known playgirl voice and greeted him gleefully. Silence soon followed. Dylan turned to her, tugged on her by the arm, and said, "Let's split." Hyde later went on to say that while Andy stayed completely silent, he could tell Warhol was upset. After they left, Andy turned to Hyde and said, "Show me the building Freddie jumped out of." They walked to the side where Freddie Herko, a dancer and factory regular, had leapt from a fifth-story window the previous year. Staring up, Andy murmured, "I wonder when Edie will commit suicide. I hope she lets us know so we can film it." Edie eventually left the factory scene totally. In its place, she tried to reignite her modeling career. Diana Vreeland described her as incredible, like Twiggy but much more American, much sexier. She captured the essence of the time. The explosion, the uncertainty, the madness that everyone lived through in the 60s. Unlike other models who went to the gym before work and led disciplined lives, Edie was deep into her vitamin kick, and everyone around her knew. Her association with drugs led to complications with her future at Vogue. The whole partnership collapsed and was never pursued again after her feature. Vogue said Edie's timing was just a fraction off. She was almost part of their carefully curated group of supermodels, and if she had been taken in, she would have had immense protection. Unfortunately, by the time she shot with Avedon, her name was showing up in gossip columns about the drug scene. Edie blamed Warhol for her troubles, saying, "Warhol fucked up a great many people's lives. My introduction to heavy drugs came through the factory." Amidst this turmoil, a glimmer of hope appeared in March 1967, a film project titled Chow Manhattan. This underground film promised to be a step above Warhol's experimental screen tests, aiming to tell Edie's own story, a blend of documentary and a drug-laced odyssey about her life within the factory and Manhattan's art scene. Unfortunately, many involved were themselves struggling with addiction, which didn't help Edie or her own dependencies. As filming progressed, her health deteriorated. She was in and out of hospitals during this time. The crew waited for her to clean up, but production faced significant setbacks. The financiers realized the production was a disaster. Money had been burned through supporting a group of drug-addicted hippies. Around this time, Edie hoped to reconnect with Warhol. They met a few times, made amends, and even collaborated on a small film together, their final piece. However, the reunion was far from joyful. Andy was disturbed during the filming, repulsed by the person he once saw as his muse. Edie was as fragile as ever, having just come out of the hospital and struggling with her confidence. She was filled with remorse, constantly apologizing. It's said that it was the most excruciating piece of footage the factory had seen, a whole reel documenting the total collapse of a person. Edie tried to be charming and delightful, smoking cigarette after cigarette, talking to Andy about things she thought he would enjoy. It didn't work. The alluring enigma that was Edie Sedgwick had become too human for the artist. Despite moments of hope, Edie's descent into addiction had become a relentless spiral. Her struggles reached a breaking point soon after, leading to her hospitalization in the psychiatric ward of Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara during the summer of 1970. Edie's life had been a constant search for meaning and belonging, but addiction had consumed her. The enigmatic and charismatic woman who once lit up every room had been lost to the very scene that once celebrated her. Inside the hospital, she carried a loose-leaf notebook filled with photographs of herself, newspaper clippings, and cutouts from magazines. She would show it to other patients to remind them, and perhaps herself, that she was someone. She had been a model and appeared in movies. She was the Edie Sedgwick. It was here that she met Michael Post, a fellow patient who would later become her husband. Remembering their first encounter, Michael said, "She came in smoking a cigarette, and she looked as light as a feather, like she was walking on air." Michael was released before Edie, but returned to visit her often. Edie was struggling, but at least during this time, she had Michael. In 1970, director John Palmer resumed Chow Manhattan. In the new footage, Edie is spiraling out from a voracious love for drugs, sex, and fame. Topless through most of the film, she lounges around all day, sharing her story with a man who picked her up hitchhiking. The film served as a vehicle for Edie to tell her own story, albeit through mumbled speech and slurred, impassioned memories chronicling her own life. After filming was completed, Edie's life seemed to take on a more peaceful pace. People around her were hopeful that she was coming back to herself, coming back to Edie. Perhaps with Michael, she found a semblance of true love. The two were married on July 24th, 1971. For the first months of their marriage, Edie managed to abstain from drugs and alcohol, and together they enjoyed a brief period of bliss. By October, a bad ear infection and a rejection of antibiotics led Edie back to pills. She'd cry all day, telling Michael how painful it was. To help distract her, he'd read her Winnie the Pooh and watch her fall asleep. As the winter of 1971 set in, John Palmer and his team were preparing Chow Manhattan for its anticipated February premiere. And then November came. On November 15th, 1971, Edie attended a fashion show at the Santa Barbara Museum. Jeffrey Post, Michael Post's brother, later recounted the events of the night. the last one of Edie's storied life. A group at the event was discussing drugs, extolling the virtues of speed and pot. Edie, wise in the destructive ways of drugs, confronted them. I've had it. I've had the whole thing, and let me tell you, it's not worth it. Don't do it. Despite her earnest plea, they dismissed her warnings with pseudo-sophisticated remarks like, you have to take it to survive. The situation took a nasty turn when Veronica Janeway came in. She was vicious, drunkenly saying, you're sick, you're an addict. Veronica was relentless. She began attacking Edie's appearance, tearing her apart for the whole room to hear. In between, Edie turned to Jeff with a devastated smile. This woman hates me. He reassured her, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be all right. Michael brought her home. He gave her her nightly pills and the two fell asleep. On the morning of November 16th, 1971, Michael woke up to the alarm and found his wife unresponsive. He desperately tried to get her up, pleading with the first responders to resuscitate her, but his appeals fell on deaf ears. They said, you know, there's nothing we can do. Before they'd even tried to do anything, as authorities prepared to take Edie away, Michael realized his wife had passed on. A doctor arrived to review her prescriptions while the officials moved with a detached efficiency. Standing beside his wife one last time, Michael looked at Edie and began to weep. He was devastated. When Edie passed, a factory regular, Bridget, informed Andy Warhol that she had suffocated. Andy asked, when, dejected and aloof as ever. He questioned how that could happen, how someone could die from something she took every night. Then he asked whether he, Michael Post, would inherit all the money. Bridget replied that Edie didn't have any money. That dried up long ago for her. The two quickly moved on and started talking about an upcoming dentist appointment. That's the tragedy of addiction. Your life spirals out, you get used to it, you go to bed fucked up and wake up like nothing happened. It's a state of constant apprehension. You start eulogizing the loss of the life you should have been living. When you start clawing yourself out of that hole, you realize nothing is permanent and life keeps going. Edie Sedgwick's story isn't just about a socialite or a tragic muse. It's about a woman navigating the chaos of newfound fame while grappling with the gnashing, unrelenting shadows of her past. To the world, she was this social butterfly, beautiful, free, and unbelievably beguiling. But inside, she struggled with what she called her icky feelings. She had thought of herself as just another kid in a big, rather unhappy family. And all of a sudden, the spotlights were on her, but inside, she still felt like a lump of dirt. That's the core of Edie's paradox. She was adored by the world, but still somehow she felt deeply unworthy of that adoration. Her life story deconstructs the facade surrounding the role of a muse, a role that often reduces women to objects for others' creativity, stripping them of their own agency. Edie wanted more than that. You care enough that you want your life to be fulfilled in a living way, not in a painting way, not in a writing way. She once said, this wasn't just an intellectual aspiration. It was a deep cry for her existence to matter on her own terms. She was no silent canvas. Edie was a voracious, restless participant in the artistic revolution of her time. Her dissent wasn't the simple result of personal weakness. It was the culmination of external pressures and internal battles she'd been fighting against for years. There was always a fatalistic streak in how she lived her life, a sense that she knew what was coming. On her wedding day, a palm reader widened her eyes in shock upon grabbing her hand. Edie laughed as she pulled her arm away. It's okay, I know. Edie mythologized her life, fully aware of what she felt her impending fate was, but still embracing every moment with reckless joy until it arrived. For so long, she shaped her identity based on how others saw her, and when the audience vanished, she found herself utterly isolated. This isolation consumed her, pushing her into vices that could only numb her pain temporarily. You have to put up with the risk of being misunderstood if you're going to try to communicate, she once said. You have to put up with people projecting their own ideas. But it's worth being a public fool if that's all you can be in order to communicate yourself. There we see all that Edie strove for in her life, to express the depth of her humanity, no matter the cost.
At least you chose the easier way.
I don't know. Don't you think that must mean something? Never occurred to me to turn it around. I mean, why didn't I think that way? This was after I had the car accident.
You do think it's easier going down than going up, don't you?
And so, well, I don't know. I think I've run out of time.
That's a pleasant dream. I wouldn't worry about reshaping it.
There's not much to do about that.